as soon as you're able to hit that button. Yes, we are live streaming on YouTube, and we are live here in our Zoom room. Welcome again to everyone. Thank you for joining us as you do each and every Tuesday. And now these days we have webinars also on Thursday. And this is part of the Global Compact for Migration webinar series that is attached to a certificate program. But we have friends and migration experts, diaspora experts, and just friends of the different organizations that put this this webinar together, joining us every Tuesday, where we unpack the objectives of the Global Compact for Migration. And today we are delighted to and surprised, I think, for those of us who have been walking this ride, that we have gone all the way to objective number 20. So we started this journey in September. And so if you're joining us today for the first time, and you haven't been here before, we encourage you to go and look at the GRFDT YouTube channel. So you would have to type Diaspora Transnationalism in your YouTube, and you'll be able to see the webinars that have preceded this one. But maybe you don't want to go there right away, because today we are going into GCM webinar number 20, where we're looking at remittances. And as when I say we, I'm talking about the organizations that are behind this webinar. That's the Cross-Regional Center for Refugees and Migrants, the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, the International Institute for Migration and Development, Metropolis Asia Pacific, Migrant Forum in Asia, and I will be your moderator today. My name is Paddy Sianga Knudsen, and I am one of the vice presidents at GRFDT. Delighted to join you and delighted to moderate a rather stellar panel that is going to dive into the topic of remittances. So today, we're trying to look at, the commitment in which countries in 2018 under the GCM came together and said, let's commit to promote faster, safer, cheaper transfer of remittances and to foster financial inclusion. So there are a number of things that keep coming up on our screens. I think we've got the live script that keeps coming up. That's good for some of our audience who would like to be able to, to read, so you can follow that. And if it's disturbing, I think there is a way that you could kind of just click the button somewhere and then it disappears off your screen. We also would just like to do a bit of housekeeping. One of the other things we'd like is that we're able to see those who are in the room. But then it would be nice if we keep our microphones muted. We try to engage a lot in these sessions, and that's why we keep the microphones. We've given you the liberty to keep your microphones on, but please only when we have gotten to that point into the agenda. So the run of show is that we're going to have a chat with our panelists, and after that we'll be moving on to the audience, where we'll be able to share our reflections, ask questions. In the meantime, we have the chat function where we can say hello to people that we haven't seen or seen before, exchange some contacts, and also listen into the panelists and be able to ask some questions, throw in some links there about some of the interesting things that are also happening in your spaces, in your area, on the topic, and also pose some questions to our panelists, because we will have an opportunity for us to deliberate on the questions. So the commitment text for GCM 20 from the Compact reads as follows: we commit to promote faster, safer, and cheaper remittances by further developing existing conducive policy and regulatory environment that enables competition, regulation, and innovation on remittance market by providing gender-responsive programs and instruments that enhance the financial inclusion of migrants and their families. We further commit to optimize the transformative impact of remittances on the well-being of migrant workers and their families, as well as on sustainable development of countries, while respecting that remittances constitute an important source of private capital and cannot be equated to other international financial flows, such as foreign direct investment, investment, official development assistance, or other public sources for financing development. So I think, there was a time in the recent years where we sort of saw that comparison coming up a lot. What's the comparison between FDI and what's coming in as ODA? So, all the aid that different countries receive that's recorded as part of official development assistance. There's a lot of foreign direct investments that's going in different sections in developing countries, and those countries that are of low income countries, for instance, and middle income countries as well, where that kind of investment is going in. And then came a time when we saw statistics rising up, and all because we had initiatives around saying, but there's so much money coming from a source that we haven't counted, and that's the diaspora, and that's migrants. So people who live and work off their homelands and are sending money home. And we want to understand, I think, in the space of this topic today on remittances, not just to kind of unpack what are remittances. I'm sure we have migrants and members of the diaspora in this room who are sending remittances home, so we do know what these are. But I think what we want to do a bit more is to understand the different connections that remittances have. We have seen some of these connections in different spaces. We saw a lot of it when we talked about information. We talked about it in data as well. We've also talked about it very recently in GCM 19 when we had the conversation on diaspora and migrant contribution. So remittances was a word that featured every other sentence. I think it was almost difficult to avoid it. And we continue to see it in many parts when we talk about social cohesion, when we talk about inclusion of migrants, and we'll continue to see it even as far down as we go in terms of partnerships, which is GCM 23. So indeed, the GCM doesn't operate, the objectives don't operate as silos, and they are very much connected. So we want, we also know, for instance, that every June there's a commemoration around, that the fact that people send remittances home. There's actually a commemoration around 16th of June or a date somewhere in June, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody can put it for us there in the chat. But today we want to know, beyond all this commemoration, beyond all this highlight of remittances, beyond all the statistics that we have seen even during COVID about how the numbers are going to go down or up, beyond also what happened also with the numbers. The World Bank gave very high estimates, then we came down to a stage where no, the estimates were not that much. What really happens around this function of remittances? It doesn't seem to be as consistent in a pattern. It's kind of like a mystery box for researchers and policymakers, and even for families themselves, particularly during COVID, on what remittances would look like for the future and what remittances would look like even for a day like tomorrow. So we want to understand, how are these, beyond the channeling of these lifelines, as they are called, what's happening beyond that? What kind of structures are there? We also want to understand what kind of initiatives are out there to ensure that the so-called end users, the families, the societies, how can we see this sort of transformative impact that we talk about in the Global Compact? We also want to understand and touch on a bit of social remittances. So we're giving a challenge to some of our panelists here to be able to move away also at some point and talk to us about what that combination looks like, financial remittances when it's mixed up with social remittances, something that we touched on a lot last week when we talked about, other non-financial remittances. So to do that today, we have an amazing panel that is here with us today. We've got Ana Ferro, who is a remittances consultant and a diaspora expert. And we have Jonas Tsefo, who is a co-founder and CEO of Pangaea Accelerator, and we'll hear more about what Pangaea is doing in the space of remittances and in the space of financial inclusion. And then we have Nadine Sagadlo, who is a researcher from Onsna. I cannot pronounce this name correctly, so Nadine, you will help me with this, but I think it says Osnabrück University. If I'm not, if my German is out of tune, please correct me. And we have Dr. Rakesh Rajan, who's an associate professor at Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Students here who interact in the Google Classroom know him as Rakesh, and we call him passionately as Rakesh because he's a very strong member of our team, helping a lot with the academic side of things. So we're really glad to have Rakesh here, and here he's sitting on the, as taking up the role of a diaspora engagement expert. So delighted to have all our panelists joining us here today. And so without, taking too much time, let me introduce our first speaker. So Anna Ferro is a senior researcher and an international consultant on diaspora engagement and development, and she works at the Study Center in International Politics in Italy, and she has had her academic education as a migrant scholar, so PhD in sociology of migration, as well as different studies in several areas. She studied in the UK, in the US, in Finland, in Romania and Croatia. And she has also worked as an expert for various universities, NGOs, organizations, as well as international agencies. A vast range of experience, and we'll be sharing in the Google Classroom Anna's bio as well, just to show the wealth of information that she has in the space of remittances and diaspora engagement. I mean, just looking even back, I think if you do your quick Google research, you will find one of the instrumental studies that she has done around a policy trying to understand migrant remittances and diaspora engagement in South Sudan, and also in many other places, including looking at things like green remittances. So vast range of issues that she has covered, and her interests are really directed at climate change and human mobility, and also looking at development issues in the Western Balkans. So Anna, we are delighted that you are joining us today. And Anna, we know that, we would just like you to have a dive into the issues that you're sharing with us today. But before you get into that dive, just walk us through kind of these diverse concepts around remittances, the lingo which is there. What does that actually mean in terms of, what we see from the migrant's point of view, but also more particularly from that legal status? Does it affect the fact that you have a legal status or not in terms of remittances? What about the integration process? How about gender, things like policies of governments as well, playing a role as an enabling factor? Anna, over to you.
Thank you very much, Paddy, and good afternoon to everybody, wherever you are. And it's really challenging to talk to such an estimated audience of experts. I consider yourself experts as well where you are. So we're gonna talk of remittances that are transfers of small amount personal funds that are transferred from a place to another, a country to another. And on average, in the global scale, the average amount of money that is sent is between $100 and $200. So it's a small quantity, but still very important for the countries where remittances arrive. And remittances need intermediators, service providers that offer a service that could be either formal or informal, whether this service provider comply to the existing regulation in the country where they operate. And in the last 10 and 20 years, we saw that the market of remittances really increased with cash transfers with money transfer operators, and then money network operators, electronic transfers, and then more recently crypto transfers, and then also banks. So there's a whole plethora of players that offer services between countries. But for us today, I think it would be interesting, and if Paddy could share, in fact, the slide that we already saw yesterday, to look at a concept that I think it would be important for us to consider today, also with the sort of disclaimer that remittances are context-based. So every context is different from one another, because migrant characteristics are different, because all countries are different, and the fragility or the stability, all these elements impact on the remittances framework that we are considering. But what I call a useful concept for us to discuss today also refers to the impact on cost of remitting is the remittance ecosystem. That is the general environment that gives the opportunity for migrants to send money and to recipients and families to receive money. And this ecosystem, from my point of view, should include both sides, because remittances are in between and they require operators, but they interact with regulations in both areas and with all different dimensions. So, for instance, if we consider the left side, that is where migrants are and where remittances start their journey, we can see that, for instance, the dimension of the legal status of migrants impact on the possibility to access formal channels of remitting. Therefore, this condition affects a lot the possibility for migrants to take a decision or to choose a channel or an operator or another. And also the economic and financial dimension or framework impacts on the possibility or the different possibilities to transfer money, that is the inclusion of migrants in the labor market, their condition, but also the changing of the migratory projects that migrants could have during their lifeline. So from the first arrival till family reunification or buying a house in the country of destination. All these aspects impact on the capacity of migrants to send money home and on the amount of money sent and on the decision to allocate resources in a way or another. So in between, we have all these operators that play a role, and sometimes even informal operators are the only and unique operator in some remote and rural areas. But the cost, in fact, is an expression of a diversity and an articulated complex of factors that impact on the cost itself. So along the remittance corridor, we can see on the other side the remittance ecosystem in the country of origin of migrants or destination of the remittance. Again, this could refer to some countries better and in some other countries in a different way. But we should consider, for instance, the dimension of the cultural or political framework. That is the country stable? Is there a conflict going on? Is there stability or not? And this all can impact on the remittances and the facility to cash out money, safely cash out money or not. Also, the economic and financial framework, whether there are financial institutions, microfinance institutions, or agents around the country, but where in rural areas or more in urban hubs, or how accessible they are. The infrastructural also framework and dimension is very important because in many countries, especially in more fragile contexts, there are no roads, electricity is difficult to obtain, or antennas and networks do not reach the whole country. So this also impacts on the remittance ecosystem. And finally, the regulatory and market framework that impacts a lot on the cost of sending money and on the capacity also to have a larger market pressure and competition in a place or another. So most countries have developed their regulation on remittances, but in some cases, it is difficult to implement regulation. It is difficult to sanction in cases where regulation is not really accomplished. And therefore, it has also an impact on the general remittance market there. And this whole picture, and then I'm going to stop for Teddy, should be really clear for development agencies or scholars or governments. They want to first know and understand what the remittance ecosystem in their case is, what are the enabling factors and the engagement tools to turn remittances into development. I'm stopping here.
Anna, thank you, for sharing this. And it's quite interesting that when you started off, we're talking, for instance, with COVID, we just see the fact that, apps, for instance, increased in number depending on your location and where you are. in the period of the pandemic, I moved between two different countries, and it was kind of like apps kind of transform and change. And I wondered also how kind of they fit into this ecosystem, right? But also, I think what's most important for us is to sort of understand the starting point of financial inclusion, right? So before I even get to the point of remitting funds, right? Before we get into the space of remitting funds, what kind of access do migrants sort of have to this financial ecosystem, or rather what kind of financial inclusion measures are they? And we know that you've done quite some interesting work, I think, in the space of your work in studying not just remittance corridors, but really trying to look at the role, for instance, of financial literacy as well. So where does that all come in?
Yeah, I think that in many cases, migrants, when they reach the destination country, they have a financial need to send money, and remittances are often the first experience of a financial services for recipients in destination country of the remittance. So remittances represent a financial service and the financial need that is crucial, but could also represent the first step for a further and larger financial inclusion. So when we talk of financial inclusion, referring to remittances and migrants family, we should consider also what financial exclusion is. So being excluded from the formal financial system, not being able to access services and products that could be of help. So financial inclusion is also linked to the formal and legal status, normally, especially in destination countries. And it's important because it's part of an integration process. For a person that has a capacity to save money and allocate money in a different way, so remittances are considered as a saving capacity for migrants, and that they would need, and they could be able also, if able to access different services and products, and also different players in the market, to move from sending remittances to realizing a project. And the project could be either a small business for the family back home, a personal business, whether in the destination or in the origin country, or whatever this could be considered. And on the other side, migrant families also, starting from remittances, could jump in the financial inclusion process. And this would be an advantage for all, because using also formal instruments for remitting would provide the safety and security for the remittance itself, for the migrant, and for the family back home. And remittances that sometimes thanks. Remittances that sometimes represent a substitute for the income of families, and sometimes a contribution, depending again on the condition in the country. If there's a war going on, remittances would represent a livelihood source. On the other side, remittances, if in a condition of financial inclusion process, could represent also a way to turn resources into plans for life, so into a job, a small activity, or different aspects. So here, for instance, you can see the sort of representation of what we've done in Italy, studying the financial inclusion process of migrants, and considering that the index for financial inclusion is considered owning a bank account or a prepaid card, anything that could represent the first step to mobilize and use money or save money. And during the years, we can see that migrants change their profile. So from simple and basic users, they some more articulate financial instruments that can accomplish their projects. So that's why it is something really crucial, financial inclusion, and something that was in the debate in the last years, and especially with the COVID, was the use and the potential of mobile money as a tool for facilitating financial inclusion. And this could be really a real potential, could have a real potential, although different are the barriers that could impede this. So infrastructure, as we saw, antennas and network exist or not, and rural areas or urban areas normally facilitate or not having access to mobile products, and therefore through their financial inclusion, or gender, literacy, and all the aspects related to the regulation, therefore protecting people that use mobile money. And it is interesting to note that there was also a research, and I'm mentioning the study in South Sudan from the World Bank, saying that 73% of the population in South Sudan had familiarity with remittances, either domestic or cross-border or international. This is a huge component along the population. That means that this population had the first exchange with financial services, with remittances, and the way should go forward in improving this capacity to manage money, save money, and use money differently. In our discourse today, I think something that would be very important, both studying remittances and considering and taking strategies or decisions related to financial inclusion, is related to data. Because data today, as yesterday, they were very important, so they are very important, but data referred to remittances are quite not completely precise, we could say. So there are some sources, as the World Bank data portal, that offer different information on the different corridors. But from one side, because of the informal flows of money that is aside official statistics, from the other side, the remittance flows are calculated in a different ways in different countries, considering the internal statistics from the central banks. And also official data do not include mobile money operations or different cryptocurrencies, or whether you use your credit cards to send money online. This is not included there. So this tell us that the whole phenomenon is underestimated. And the other side tells us that there is a need to get more data in different ways. So either case studies, national surveys, and reinforcing national statistics on this. Thanks.
And thank you. And I think an interesting point there that you've made. And when we had a discussion, I think I told you how sometimes we think it's very scientific, the fact that some of the remittances are not taken care of. But, you know, simple examples, I think a conversation I also had with you, where I was talking about sending money to a friend sitting in London, and then having chickens delivered between our two grandmothers in Zambia, and nobody takes a track of that to see what that means. And then many more examples that I think also at bigger levels and scales, particularly during COVID, but also thinking about the role that post offices, for instance, had, and that had been quite underestimated, I think. So I think a question that we'll leave to you as we'll move on to the next panelist is for us to also have a bit of an understanding about, you know, kind of these invisible and non-traceable, you know, remittances. You know, that kind of go because they're not captured in one way or another. I mean, I think there is a system in some parts of North Africa, if I'm not mistaken, called the Hawala system, and many other systems where transfers are done and that doesn't go through. And so we'll leave kind of that one with you to talk a little bit about us in terms of your experience and what you've sort of seen and what we're really missing and what we could kind of reinforce in the space of remittances. And moving on to our next panelist, Jonas. who has an ambition, as we had spoken in our pre-call, to even say very boldly that we should be able to double remittances in a couple of years, and we will hear a little bit more about where that inspiration comes from. But just to introduce Jonas is he has a strong voice in the African and the Nordic startup scene, and he's worked in over 200 plus African startups, or rather African enterprise, if we could put it in that way, working particularly in tech and based out of Pangaea Trust in Kenya. And he's also a board member of the Kenyan National Innovation Agency. He's been an entrepreneur, over 15 years plus experience, building startups in the tech industry, food industry, as well as looking at impact startups. And in addition to the work that he does in business development, he has also, worked with a wide range of actors, whether it's private sector or the United Nations space, for instance, UN Habitat, but also working with innovators and big names in the private sector, P&G, Ericsson, Habitat for Humanity, amongst others. And he's also a board member of V Forestry, a nonprofit that contributed to the planting of over 141 million trees in Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, and Tanzania. Jonas, I'll put you up to the challenge, because when I visit these countries, I'll go and just get amazed at, just the impact of the work that you do. But I think when we spoke, you were very big on impact, and we just, kind of wondering, even as we bring you on, we know you are very private sector savvy, and kind of this spectrum that you have. Often when we talk about remittances, there's this angle as though the government should be sitting with a huge pot, which has got different types of pockets and structures and mechanisms in which diaspora should be bringing into according to the diversity that they have. But I think we know that private sector has this fast-moving, impact-driven ambition. We know that sometimes public sector can be very inefficient and not so action-oriented as private sector is. And so we wanted to understand from you this ambition that we talked about, kind of we can double these remittances. Where do you see that kind of potential, and what do we need in terms of the mindset? And in telling us about this, we'd like to also hear more about the, Pangaea strategy and the ambitions that you have for diaspora in really being put at the center in terms of nation building in their homelands. And obviously you're speaking from Kenya, but I think you can also give us a lot of examples from your very vast experience in sort of innovative financing. Also bring in, what you sort of see as some of the very best practice as in terms of partnerships, where government is not lagging and where diaspora is really looking to engage. And with that, we hand the floor to you, Jonas.
Wow, thank you for the great introduction. It was quite long, I realized. I should have sent a very short one. I was like, no, but yeah, my name is Jonas Tesfaye. I usually present myself as an entrepreneur, but I do a lot of different things. The reason I say entrepreneur is because that's a side of me I like most, and I think that's a side of me that would be most value adding. Actually, I just came out of the Kenya Innovation Agency now. We've been working on a master plan for innovation for Kenya. So we're trying to help the Kenya government outcompete all the other African countries as part of strategy for innovation and other things. So I just came out from a very creative and brainy session. But I think this is perfect timing to discuss what we're discussing, and also, many of your questions. So let's start with the first one on remittances and how I look at it. So my background is from Eritrea. Almost 40% of Eritrean GDP comes from remittances. Eritrea, together with Somalia, is some of the highest percentage-wise GDP. So for me, remittances is like stuff I've been growing up with. I've seen my parents' remittance strategy, and for some reason, people are assuming that me and my siblings are the same as my parents, and obviously we're not. And we don't have any plan of inheriting their remittance plan. But we also see that nobody's designing any remittance plan for us. So we're wondering, what is our role as part of nation builders? And why isn't anybody speaking to us as like, how are you contributing to your country or to the continent? And why isn't people looking at us as a resource? And actually what I come to understand is that we're pretty resource blind here. The other thing is we know very little about it, and there's very few that are driving innovation and solutions. It's mainly looking at data, statistics, central bank, these kind of players. But like, we look at ourselves as an innovation lab for the African diaspora, where we want to design and develop innovative tools that will catalyze more remittances and stimulate the diaspora to look for new things. Why? Why is a method of how people should support static? Like, we are the same people as our parents. We're radically different. So individualize a menu for me then, and how I can do. And I'm more interested in investing. I also have an MBA and worked in many different companies. Maybe I can support in other ways, knowledge-wise. I'm also based in the Nordics. Why can't I be sales distribution for businesses who wants to enter the Nordic market? Why am I reduced to numbers and money I'm sending and how much cost I'm paying, transaction fees for this money? Like, come on. Don't reduce diaspora into these significant roles and inheriting. No, we look at it as a blank canvas, basically. The way that we work through Pangaea Trust is that we try to encourage the governments to the ability we can to develop a diaspora strategy. And we want a diaspora strategy where they are looking at it like how India developed their country with help of the diaspora, meaning that government of India had a role for the diaspora to play to develop a country. And we don't see that today. And for me, it's what a resource waste, basically. Because we know that if you look at India, they had $3 billion in 1990. 10 years later, they reached 12 billion. This is year 2000. In 2010, they went from 12 billion to 50 billion. Now we start talking. And in 2020, they hit $83 billion, which is more than the whole African continent. This growth from 3 billion to 83 billion didn't happen by chance. It was a strategy. It was a structure. It was predefined roles. It was communication, education as part of it. So why isn't other African countries copying this? And the other thing we're looking at is, why isn't African countries collaborating more on how to activate the diaspora and the role of the diaspora and how to maximize value that can come out of remittances? It's like the way my perception, this is my subject perception as Jonas, but the way that I perceive African countries looking at them, and obviously there are 55 different countries, so it's difficult drawing everybody on the line, but the way that the main perception is that the diaspora is like donors. They don't even look at the diaspora as potential investors. And it's money. You don't look at things outside of it. And it's kind of sad. Even though I sit in the Kenyan National Innovation Agency and the board of it, it's not like the Eritrean government has said, hey, Jonas, do you have any plans on how we can develop the Eritrean innovation ecosystem? You run an accelerator, have a nonprofit, and you're leading investor. Maybe you can support. Nope. No. We're not in the industry of looking at being resource smart. We're in the industry of summarizing me into a number. And that for me is, the role of the African diaspora on the continent. I fully don't agree with this image, as you can hear. I look at the African diaspora being the Africa's hidden superpower that we just haven't activated yet. That's how I look at it. Our ambition is to double remittances to Kenya within the next 10 years. We think that this is fairly low ambitions, to be honest. And we don't understand why people are not aiming for this. We're starting off in the countries we operate in, which is Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia. We're also working with the development sector as part of why don't they have a diaspora strategy? Why isn't the biggest investor into the continent, as it's more than direct foreign investment, it's more than aid funding. Why don't everybody have a strategy for mobilizing more funding from the diaspora? But we can spend a lot of money trying to get US investment companies to come. They never sent a single dollar But speaking with people that send money all the time as part of like how do we get investment done, that's not seen as a low-hanging fruit. So we want to disrupt this whole thing, to be honest. I'm quite offended by how certain systems look at the diaspora in the fact that they're not prioritizing more. I kind of look at it as doing the opposite from their jobs. I can give you an example. In Norway sends about 60 million euros to Somalia a year as an international development budget, okay? But guess what? The Somali diaspora in Oslo sends 120 million euros every year. That's twice as much. Do you think the development system and the embassy are aligned with the people in Oslo sending this money? Nope. Nope, they're not. Even though it's twice as much than their budget, it's not like, oh, maybe it should be our job to look at synergy and that 1 + 1 might be 3. Nope. It's now that we are pushing them and asking them, sorry, but is diaspora money less worth than your money? Is that the thing? And then they obviously get very defensive. No, absolutely has nothing to do with this. We just don't know much about the diaspora. We don't know how to speak. We had some events. So that's why we're like, you know what? We're going to make it easy for you. We're experts on diaspora. We develop solutions, and it's all about catalyzing. Because you clearly are not good at utilizing the force of the diaspora. So we need to get a player and an expert that can activate and act as a bridge. But we're not okay with just sitting here and watching how resource dumb we are as a civilization when we are aiming at solving the sustainable development goals. When we see how many social problems there are and we see the effect of COVID and what it's done as part of bringing people to poverty. We don't have time to be resource blind. Every dollar matters. And for people who are already investing and sending money to the diaspora, there's an opportunity to expand that funding, and that we'll be specializing on and getting other people to understand that honestly, we're looking at this whole narrative in the wrong way. We should look at how do we grow it and strategize around it. Look at the future opportunities, not the historical data of last year. Yeah, I think that would be my short intro talk.
And it may be in 2 minutes or 3 minutes, if you may. We're just trying to get, okay, so I think you've made a lot of valid points there in terms of kind of looking at diaspora as passive. So how do we move to kind of having a more proactive, and by we, it's the whole of society, all of governments, whether it's governments that are involved in sending development assistance, but sending countries as well, like you've talked about, countries that have sent migrants out there, or migrants that have sent themselves, and governments that are looking to benefit from them. What kind of a blueprint are we talking about here? And what kind of a partnership? Actually, what does it look like when people want to, when we talk about diaspora investment? I'm in the diaspora, and often I kind of really get lost. What does that mean? What kind of mechanisms? And because we're stuck on mechanisms and structures on the formal side, can you give us some like very concrete examples of some of the mechanisms that you would have where diaspora cuts off all the red tape that seems to be there on the very kind of government-led initiatives, at least most of them that have that, or very kind of futuristic way of looking at things. We've heard about green remittances, and I'm looking at Anna when I say this, and some of us in the diaspora think, oh, this is really futuristic, because we look at what's happening on the space on the ground and we wonder how green remittances are even going to work, or maybe do we really understand green remittances? Another thing, but also kind of the use of technology on us. So maybe a very practical example that shows us some innovation where diaspora is actually kind of can leverage the kind of results that you're talking about, and where we see the use of technology. Is technology actually still useful for us in terms of some of these solutions?
Short answer, absolutely. We, as Pangaea Trust, we develop solutions on different ways. One is Pangaea Connect, is a equity investment platform for the African diaspora to invest in vetted businesses, mainly starting in Kenya, but we're also expanding to Ethiopia, Somalia, and beyond. So this is a way where, because we as Pangaea, we've been working a lot on accelerated program capacity building, identifying talented entrepreneurs. Usually we get over 1,000 applications to our program, but we have to pick the 10 best, meaning that 990 don't get in, but 10 do. So these 10 that do get in are on a very different level. We also work with them for 3 months and do everything called vetting, legal, financial, social, name it. So what we've done with the platform is basically going back to our roots and then looking at how do we digitalize the whole journey, and how do we create an ecosystem of trust that enables the diaspora to not only invest, but also have a structured post-investment program, meaning what happens after I've invested, who's helping this business grow in the different areas. So we want to look at like a total package, not just encourage the diaspora to invest and then bye-bye. That's one. The second thing is something we're working with the Kenya Diaspora Alliance. This is a membership organization with about 250,000 members. Kenyan Diaspora, here we're creating a fund vehicle. So we're looking at a diaspora fund structure, starting with Kenya, but something that could be replicated across the continent and also be designed in different sizes. Why? Because if you look at Kenya, they have a Kenya Diaspora Investment Club. Problem is they haven't invested yet, even though they have a community of people who want to invest, because they lack they don't know how to set up the structure around it to make it as efficient as possible. It's not like they don't know how to set up an investment vehicle, but for this specific purpose, they don't know how to design the deal flow of finding businesses and vetting them. They don't know how to handle the post-investment structure. So obviously, you know, doing this in co-creation is perfect, because then that's the area where we are best. While the investment club can mobilize people from the diaspora that are interested in investing. So by co-creating and developing this together, we are then, you know, creating something interesting and something that could be replicated or scaled. Same with the platform. A third element is on Islamic Finance Innovation Lab. First of all, the tech platform I mentioned in the beginning, it's also getting Sharia approved, meaning that people can invest, according to Sharia or halal investment. So we'll also accept that and do branding. But when it comes to Islamic Finance Innovation Lab, what we see is that 53% of the African continent are Muslim, which means that Africa is a Muslim majority continent. And we see that there's basically nothing happening in the Islamic finance space. And even as a diaspora is a big proportion of Muslims, you don't have solutions that is targeting subgroups within the diaspora. For example, we are targeting African diaspora that are Muslims. Nope. Or we're targeting African diaspora that are women. So the fact that what we expect to see is that more niche products and solution coming, because the African diaspora is not one. So some of the areas where we're using technology and solutions as part of how can we catalyze more remittances. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jonas. I think it's been really interesting kind of listening into the products. And I have a question, and I think there's a lot that's coming in through the chat as well. And indeed, people wanting, you know, because we do have members of the diaspora, we have members of diaspora organizations, I think, who are here as well. So it would be great to get a few links, which we will get through either with Jonas sharing these links, or we will come around and share. But, you know, in a moment, it would also be interesting to sort of hear kind of some of the other partnerships that you have. You know, how are you really steering in? We've heard, for instance, that you know, Kenya wants to go, you know, Kenya I think was one of the first or at least, you know, one of the first ones that came out talking about these diaspora bonds, for instance, right? So how do you kind of make these linkages? So if I'm a member of the diaspora, so it's a very simple practical question. If I'm the member of the diaspora, the Kenyan government said that it's putting out diaspora bonds, which I still, you know, maybe you can do a diaspora bonds for us for dummies, if you like, for 101 to understand what that means. And then you've got these opportunities that are coming through outfits like Pangaea Trust, which have a lot of collaborations, and I understand also from donors. So, you know, how do you kind of find this information when you're sitting? So it's sort of two ways, you know, this kind of new formulations and this new realization that there's this financing that's available from this, you know, group of people that are living and working outside of the country, and governments are also up to it through diaspora bonds, but also trying to understand how do you get this information. And a trick question added to that: if I'm irregular, so meaning I've been working illegally in the Middle East, I'm here for 13 years, the dollar is the dollar, I'm working in the US, I'm working wherever I am working. The euro is the euro, the dollar is the dollar. But somehow, how do these remittances then end up in spaces like yours? So it's a bit of just kind of understanding how, the target group also that you have in terms of diaspora. But we will come back to you, and thanks again for kind of giving us this very refreshing, I think, vigor to our conversation here today. So, and we're glad that you're still here with us. And we'll now turn to back to a researcher that works also on diaspora engagement, and we're really glad that Nadine is able to join us here today. Nadine is a researcher and a PhD candidate at the Institute for Migration Research and Intercultural Studies, as well as the Institute for Social Sciences at Osnabrück University, I think I got it right, where she has been working on a research project that's known as Women, Forced Migration and Peace. The question, looking at the question of peace building practices of women in refugee camps. And her research interests include global refugee regime, global refugee policies, peace and conflict, climate change, human mobility, and many others, with a regional focus on sub-Saharan Africa. And she holds a master's degree in politics and public administration from the University of Constance and a master's degree in international development studies from Utrecht University. I think I have spoken enough German in one sentence today. So, really glad that we have you here with us. I seem to have lost my screen, but just let me know. Can you hear me? Am I visible?
Yes, Paddy. Yes.
Very good. I've lost my screen for some reason. It's decided to go up in the air, but I'll fix that in a moment. And Nadine, we know that your research you've done some very interesting research in Ghana that looks at migration policy making and also kind of the central role that statistics play. So take us to a place that others have been talking about. Anna touched on it in a very sunk way, I think, in terms of what that policy space looks like on the receiving side, but you can, zero us in here into Ghana. And we wanted to understand, kind of the structural aspects, the policies, and the importance that you saw as, the role of remittances in countries of origin from the context of Ghana. And so maybe we start with that before we move on to the next question. The floor is yours, Nadine.
Yeah, thank you so much for this invitation, and also for the kind introduction, Paddy, for the German you spoke very well. And yeah, I'm very happy to be part of this panel and this webinar today. So yeah, I would like to answer your question by sharing some insights from the research that I've conducted in Ghana. But before that, I would like to start off with a few background notes on that study, so that you know from which angle I looked at it. So I investigated how migration is governed in a multi-level policy environment by examining the case of Ghana and its national migration policy. So I mainly looked at the policy formulation process, but today we'll focus more on the aspect of remittances. So my research was driven by the observation when talking about international migration from African states to Europe, then the main public and also the political discourse is about curbing irregular migration. So EU efforts mainly focusing on combating the root causes of flight and migration, achieving compliance on return and readmission. So largely the EU interests that shape the agenda. Various African countries focus on legal migration pathways, and then also the usage of migration for development are often undermined. And then in general, we can observe that neglects what countries of origin on the African continent do themselves to deal with the phenomenon of human mobility and how they make use of it for their purposes. When we look at the West African region, the regional organization ECOWAS strongly promotes migration management and has, with the ECOWAS protocol, taken a pioneer role in regional free movement on the continent. In 2008, it even introduced a common approach on migration that spells out guidelines for migration governance in the region. And one of the 6 principles highlights that legal migration towards other regions of the world contributes to ECOWAS member states' development. And as one of the first ECOWAS member states, Ghana adopted its national migration policy in 2016 as a reaction towards the absence of an encompassing national framework on migration. And this official aim of this policy is to help manage its internal, intra-regional and international migration flows for poverty reduction and sustained national development. So it is under this nexus of migration and development that remittances play a key role in countries of origin. So in Ghana, with the national migration policy, migration is viewed to have great potential for the country's development. So we have heard that already remittances exceed foreign direct investment and official development assistance, so also in Ghana. And remittances have increased over the past years and decades. They are an important financial source for many households. They contribute to poverty reduction and contribute here to national development. So it is a huge intent of the country to engage the diaspora, to increase remittance flows and eventually contribute to national development. And in this context, then also a country's focus is on reducing the barriers of transaction and the limits that are associated with the costs attached. So what I found in my analysis of the policymaking process of the national migration policy for Ghana and the stakeholder involvement therein is actually a clash of positions. So we have the government of Ghana on the one side with its position and focus on using the potential of migration for the development of the country by encouraging the engagement of the diaspora through the promotion of remittance transfers, and then through the achievement of development for the country. At the same time, we have the EU as the main financing institution of this policy that is largely focused on migration management with the aim of controlling migration of irregular and low-skilled migrants to Europe. So what does this then imply in practice? We know that migration or migratory movements play a huge role for the country Ghana. On the one hand side, on the individual level, it's a huge sign for prestige and social status of a person. So let's talk about traveling that comes with a positive reputation. So traveling, this is how migration widely is referred to in the public discourse. And it's then difficult and unattractive for the government to restrict mobility as demanded by the EU, as it will also eventually affect votes. On the other hand, there is the political level where the government has little interest in restricting migration because emigration reduces pressure on the internal labor market. And at the same time, emigration generates remittances, which then supports the state to a large extent. So therefore, I argue that it is important to take the different actors, but also their various interests and priorities into consideration, especially when we talk about the usage of remittances for development. It is often undermined by such efforts as undertaken by the EU to reduce irregular movements into its territory. So to real cooperate, both sides need an honest exchange of the positions and an environment where their interests can be equally discussed and considered, and also where policies are eventually in line with each other. So yeah, let me stop here and hand over to you, Paddy.
Thank you so much. I think that very last sentence there where we talk about an honest exchange, and I think we have seen the trajectory, I think in terms of African agency. I think when we talk about migration and development, you know, that kind of connection for a very long time, sort of seeing that the pen was still sitting a lot with, you know, partners in Europe in terms of how, you know, migration sort of is viewed. And I think for a long time, advocates such as, you know, migrants organizations, but also international organizations kind of stepping in to have this kind of migrant focused perspective to migration, that actually migrants have agency, you know, and that it was sort of course, you've got economic factors that drive people to migrate, but also I think, you know, also it pushed a lot also by for instance, IOM, that kind of came to the fact that migration is actually it's the oldest livelihood strategy that people have. So people will always move, and therefore migration is not something that we have to manage, but rather that we have to facilitate. So very interesting to sort of also hear kind of these conceptual spaces taking shape into policy. And we were just wondering, as a second question that comes to you in a few minutes, if you can tell us also then, to what extent do you sort of see these policies that are focusing on migration, on development, on remittances? How do they then contribute to the achievement of the Global Compact for Migration Objective number 20 on remittances?
Yeah, thank you very much. Shall I go in right here? Yeah, all right, perfect, thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
As I've already indicated, I mean, the National Migration Policy for Ghana has migration for development as an overarching theme. However, this was considered to not be sufficient. So officials decided to formulate, on top of that, a diaspora engagement policy to further stress and harness the developmental role remittances by the diaspora could play for national development. And then under the auspices of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the so-called Diaspora Affairs Bureau, policy formulation took place or still takes place. The policy is currently in the adoption process. And this diaspora engagement policy has the aim, a lot of these aims that we already heard about, to put this into practice, to provide a structured way for diaspora investments, to also consider skills and knowledge transfer, and to design so-called attractive financial packages to enhance diaspora investment for development. And it has 4 strategic objectives, and one is the mobilization of resources for sustainable development, but it also touches upon the availability of data, as we heard from Anna previously, but it also talks about legal aspects that concerns Ghanaians abroad, for example, voting rights that could potentially be extended. So the main question then when we talk about the diaspora engagement policy is then, who actually do we consider as a diaspora? Is it only immigrants with citizenship, or are we also talking about 2nd or 3rd generation non-citizens, or everybody that identifies to have Ghanaian origins? I think this is also a very important point that we can take along in this discussion of to whom is this objective of the inclusion of financial inclusion and the consideration of remittances actually apply to? Is it more than just the so-called migrants that we might have in place, but who else is addressed by this objective, but also by the so-called diaspora engagement in general? So to what extent do all these endeavors that Ghana has undertaken in the context of the diaspora engagement policy contribute to achieving objective 20 of the Global Compact for Migration? So these policies, they provide roadmaps, action plans, and they guide the ways ahead in specific areas of interest. In this specific context, enhancing the transfer of remittances. However, I believe to really have an impact, they need to be designed inclusively. We can read from the diaspora engagement policy, from official descriptions and also the internal discussion that I had during my research, it appears as if it mainly benefits the state in the first place. It's very specific on its goal, national development. For this purpose, it even foresees to channel remittances into prepared packages to reach investments, for example, in the energy or infrastructure sector. And it appears a little as if remittances and eventually migrants are used there for the benefit of the states, and that the states kind of can then reduce on its own task of good and service provision. And here I see a risk of putting the state interests above those of migrants. So that I see the need that also policies include the role and the perspective of migrants, their rights as well as their well-being. And I think the GCM objective provides some guidance here, but I think it's then necessary to also mainstream all those objectives and the clear specifics that are spelled out in its explanation, that it's all mainstreamed into policies and plans, and most importantly, that eventually, it gets implemented in practice.
Nadine, thank you for these reflections on this particular question. And I think as we step away from you for a moment, we just want to, having listened to you, I think it's really interesting to kind of hear how, even though the goalpost has then changed into the hands of the diaspora being engaged. I mean, often I'm also thinking about this, not just in the space of Ghana, but in many type of diaspora engagement, where that whole adoption process of a diaspora-related engagement policy still sits with the ministry. I mean, for me, it's kind of fascinating. It's like, I want to engage you, but then I will talk to myself to see how I can engage you, instead of sort of listening in much more keenly to the voices. And one of the questions, and Dr. Raj has kind of touched on it in the chat, is something that we talked about also last week, and you've touched upon it in terms of, when we look at whose interests do they serve, whose interests do remittances serve, right? And you put it in a way that it's kind of very clear that sometimes it's in a lot of cases it's so much the state above the migrants and the diaspora, and also kind of taking a bit of a ride, I think I would say, like we have seen in other spaces, where migrants, as though they wouldn't have agency, like they wouldn't have agency to engage. I mean, migrants have agency to engage even in humanitarian situations where there is no functioning government. So if we think about this migrants agency that maybe actually has also facilitated or has given them this inspiration to, even in most cases, take on, in a lot of cases rather than most, to take on irregular journeys, and that lead you then to bring remittances that come back. To think that then you could just say, we're going to engage you, we're going to ask you to do A, B, C, D, and through this ministry, we're going to manage this. Or we talk about a topic that we touched on last week, which was looking at migrants who, and diaspora rather, that have moved out because of political issues that are back home. So those political dynamics, and then you have the same mechanisms, or rather, and sometimes also political systems that are trying to engage the same migrants that left because of them, kind of chicken and egg situation. Where should we really be changing this, and who should be engaging and who should be listening? So how do we really bring in migrants agency? Again, in kind of these new ones, and I think we can also talk a bit, if you have any experience on this. Last week we talked a lot about the year of return in Ghana, and now they have so-called beyond the return, that also kind of saw, I guess, social remittances, and how that actually has a lot of migrant agency in it. So we'll kind of leave this one hanging. I don't even know whether it's a question or something, a consideration that you can come back to us. But we want to cross over from Africa and take a stop in a continent that's close to my heart, in Asia, and also with one of my colleagues from GRFDT, but today sitting representing the institution that gives him a lot of the a lot of the work that he has done around remittances. And I would like to introduce Dr. Rakesh Rajan. And Rakesh, it's really a great pleasure to have you on here. I'm just waiting for you to be spotlighted, because it's very rare, first of all, I think, for students who have not seen Rakesh, but they write to Rakesh about a lot of different things that are happening. And now we have you on the panel today, and we're delighted. And Rakesh has been working on international labor migration, remittances, diaspora, and immigrant entrepreneurship for the past 7 years. And he is working at the Indian Center for Migration, the ministry. He has worked at the Indian Center for Migration, Ministry of External Affairs with the government of India, and also at GRFDT in New Delhi. He has also had a brief working experience with the Institute of South Asian Studies, the National University of Singapore, and the Center for Development Studies. And he recently co-authored a book called Indian Diaspora Homeland Engagement education, and healthcare sector. And we're putting him on the spot today because we think that there's such a wealth of information that comes when we talk about diaspora. It's a pity we couldn't have the whole presentation that Anna, for instance, prepared for us, which graphically shows us after when we're looking at China, we have India, we have Mexico as sort of the countries. When we talk about remittances, it's almost synonymous, I think, to these countries. And particularly when we talk about internal remittances, which a lot of times in the space of international migration we don't touch on. But Rakesh, we're not going to unpack this for you. What we just wanted to get a sense from you is what you've prepared for us. We know you've written quite widely on this subject and particularly put a lot into that publication that you did. So just take us away with your presentation for today. Rakesh, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paddy, and glad to be here. I have been interacting with the participants since long time actually, and this is something I wanted to engage on with this issue of GCM Objective 20. This is something I'll complement which the presentation by Anna and Nadine and Jonas. Very important thing and very required thing. If we see, are we actually recognizing migrants, or do we know who is our migrant? I was also reading the question raised by Dr. Raj. In our case, I'll give you an example from South Asia. We always try to celebrate our migrants or celebrate our diaspora, but we often ignore, and that celebration is also half-heartedly, but we often ignore the importance of our migrants and diaspora. I'll suggest you one thing to all the participants also. You read the mandate and objectives of different migration organizations, be it government organizations, be it research organizations or civil society organizations. How many of these organizations are actually writing remittance is one of the mandate of the organization? Do they actually even write remittance as a word in their objectives, in their research, in their like objective of the organization, vision of the organization, or planning of the organization? We often ignore this term remittances, and very sad situation is if we'll talk about South Asia or let's say low and middle income countries, we are talking about $460 billion according to World Bank, and this $460 billion we ignore. We ignore, like we don't recognize this importance of this direct financial transfers to household. And this recognition is important. That's why I started my discussion with saying, do we actually recognize our migration or diaspora? Before we discuss diaspora engagement and how problematically we have recognized the engagement prospects, I'll give you very quickly after a few things I'll share about remittances, then we'll go to diaspora engagement, and I'll share how Indian government is doing, because considering I'm from India, I know better Indian system. So I'll inform you how Indian government is handling. Before we say this thing, we go to this part. 2-3 things which is people repeatedly say. We always listen about this thing. Technological innovation for remittances. Very widely used word, technological innovation. We should do technological innovation. We should do this thing. How many of us are actually even thinking about literacy related things? Do they have mobile phone? Do they have a smartphone to use this kind of technological innovation? Do they have internet access at the workplace? Very simple, in a very simple word I have used, we have completely ignored the choice of mobility to migrant workers. How many migrant workers can actually use internet facility from morning till the time they sleep, 24 hours? Do they have? And again, when we discuss remittances, we again, this mobility question will be there whenever we'll discuss about remittances. They don't know how to use internet, and they don't know how to go to the MTOs, migrant transfer organization, which results usage of informal channels. And our problem, our means civil society's problem, and also policy makers' problem, we want to reject informal channel. And no one can reject informal channel, because informal channel is need of migrant workers. Migrant workers will have to use informal channel because they are not empowered or they are not given access to use formal channels. So this part we have to address this part. We have to prepare a recommendation, because informal channels cannot be rejected. Rather, we have to do something. And this technological innovation, question about technological innovation is important, because if they don't have mobile phone, we don't want to teach them. And this the part of this GCM objective or financial inclusion. Financial literacy program. How many migrants are having? We have in South Asia nowadays, everyone is talking about pre-departure orientation and training program, PDOT. We say all quite often we do PDO. All organizations are saying we are doing PDOs. How these PDOs are taking place? We have one pamphlet, one poster informing all the things, and we are circulating. This is our PDOs. Whenever we discuss this is all about this. Briefly, I wanted to discuss about this GCM objective 20. We have written this thing. We should ensure better remittance process. We should ensure financial inclusion. But where we have come out with it, this 2018 government of India came out with a policy document saying all migrant workers should pay less money when they migrate. So we should work towards enabling migrant workers for lesser transaction charges. I was thinking about India has progressed well in terms of this exchange money, this migration cost. The migration cost is the remittance cost, basically. And this celebratory statements are coming with, we are only paying 5 to 6% as a value, exchange value or remittance cost. This 5 to 6% is actually more than $5 billion. So whatever remittances we are getting in India, this hard-earned money, this migrants living in very extreme vulnerability, extreme pathetic situation, they are paying $5 to $6 billion just to transfer their money, their own money, to their home, to their families. And we are celebrating this. We are thinking we have done something. But this $5-6 billion, why one should pay? I'll give you an example. What is the problem with policymakers? In India, if I'll have to transfer $1,000, I'll be paying $0.004 or something less than that. And if this border things will come in between, the cost increases. And just because we are not able to settle this problem, because again, this is all a SWIFT code-based system, digital payment systems. Governments can actually easily do this thing. So this thing need to be engaged. Let's slightly, I'll move to your question about diaspora engagement. Diaspora engagement, whenever we talk about engaging our diaspora, there are ways to do this thing. And Jonas was talking about diaspora bonds also for government. In the case, I'll give you our example from India. Diaspora bonds, there is an incident where someone from Indonesia contacted me. He asked, look, we want to develop these diaspora bonds. How to do that thing? I said, diaspora bonds cannot be opportunity. Diaspora bonds are basically relations with diasporas and homeland. You cannot say, look, I am in an economic crisis now. I need your money. Give me your money, and I'll be very happy. And after 5 years, I'll not know you. The situation is very difficult. We in India also, when I say diaspora engagement in India, these diaspora bonds are basically occasional events. And these occasional events again will direct us towards celebrating diaspora. Diasporas are not to celebrate and not to call in terms of difficulties. There should be continuous relationship. And this continuous relationship, in our case, in South Asian case, we have certain engagements, and certain engagements is to say we had actually institutional mechanisms. Again, what happens whenever a diaspora comes with a money, like I have few $1 billion and I want to spend to my homeland, the channels are again bureaucratic channel. We don't have something called, look, I need to spend $2 billion, and this $2 billion I am in the USA, Silicon Valley, I have earned $2 billion, I am sending to my homeland, and let homeland people spend. Problem is, who will ensure actual expenditure, proper usage of that money? And that part is actually missing in overall discussion about diaspora engagement. Which actually results, and where we are going with all this money. This actually results in individual activities. So in India, I'll conclude my things with this information from my book about diaspora engagement. After carefully reviewing all the diaspora engagement processes, we could identify only two ways which is popular, which is actually making sense. The first thing, either migrants should go individually or with organization. So we often see migrant organizations are being established to support their homeland. Often this thing, and migrant organizations can be considered collective initiatives. And we have individual initiatives and collective initiatives. And these collective initiatives, considering they are a group of people, they start their business or they collaborate with local organizations. You know, we are not trying to connect with government. Government is somewhere left behind. Diaspora organizations, they connect with local organizations and they try to spend and they try to use their money. So diaspora engagement, this is where I started and I will finish now. The diasporas cannot be event-based connections, event-based networks. If we have to ensure diaspora organization, there should be continuous communication and channel of communication, which should be active always. And then only this relationship can be continued, and then only we can have some productive outcome of the relationship. Thank you.
Rakesh, thank you so much for sharing those insights. I think you touched on some very critical issues. You have to continually invest in diaspora before expecting to be bailed out. I think, you know, really putting in a way that the relationship that countries have, for instance, with the IMF have to be a bit different with, you know, their own citizens abroad and even those who are connected to that homeland. It has to be a different format altogether. And we're really happy now to kind of just open the floor with those kind of reflections. Also thinking in, I think you know, hoping that a little bit later on, Rakesh, you can and others as well chime in. I think Anna, we gave you this homework as well to think about these informal channels, which of course on one end we see that they seem to be sort of almost three camps in this space, where some are saying let's do away with informal remittances because they're kind of, you know, they have this lack of security for the migrants, and then the migrants who have been excluded out of the space say, please don't do away with them because, you know, we still want to have the opportunity of us being able to send because it's too expensive. So we saw how migrants were affected by post offices closing, or small shops that people used to send money close, or even just the fact that people were not moving, so they were not able to send envelopes cash in hand from one space to another. So I think you brought up some really important points that we hope can be reflected. Ngozi, I know you are in the room and you are firing up in the chat. I know Mr. Base is here. Faith Sun, you're here. So we hope, we ask our panelists to have a bit of endurance with us because we've taken a bit of time. But let's start with Mr. Base, some reactions from your side, and then Ngozi. I think you just need to unmute and then we will have you on.
I've done that.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Can you get me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, we
Thank
can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you very so much. The issue of remittance and investment back home has always been an issue almost in every quarter. I have a government that was asking, how do we really classify who is the diaspora? Because the diaspora remittance was to be blessed with voters' voting right. The diaspora demanded that, look, if you really want us to send money home, if you really want to monitor us, then you should be able to give us a right to partake in what is happening back home in the country of origin. The government of the day said, look, we need to be careful to know who really is the diaspora, because we were talking about the first, second, third generation that has migrated to a country. And some argument was so keen that top policy makers and top politicians may be able to hijack the process and start to dismantle government at home. So what do we do about that? We say, okay, fine, what do we do? Let's bring down remittance through investment. If we bring out remittance through investment, that is a key. Just like we are looking for foreign direct investment, every government does. Every government look for foreign direct investment. We can see the diaspora's remittance as a channel whereby they invest in company XYZ, and then government now tax the company XYZ as a source of revenue to develop the homeland, rather than creating a pause and asking for remittance money when we refuse to give them the voting right. When they are desperate, we are not there for them. We ask for money, we are not going to give service. So that's my take. I strongly believe that if we want to flow through remittance, we should go through investment channel. Let diasporas invest in companies back home here. Let them invest in channels. Jonas really make a good move there. If you can front out a platform where diaspora invests, that platform can be accountable, because in every 5 years, 6 years, in some question, government change. And when government change, it change with policies. Mr. X will come out with his own policies. Mr. B will come out with his own policies. And so you cannot guarantee that investment if it flow through government channel, but if it flow through private bodies, private organizations. Let's take, for instance, I invest in Tata. If I'm an Indian, I invest in Tata. Tata is guaranteed. If I in Nigeria, you invest in flour mill is guaranteed. If you are in Nigeria, you invest in Dangote is guaranteed. But other companies, other government will come and go in a period of 5 years. That's my contribution.
Because what I don't want is if financing tonight should be an issue. Yes.
Ngozi, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay. Let me be fast. Welcome, Nadine. You are welcome to our class as a guest. Mine will be too short. What are the strategies you think you said that the policy is still on the process of coming out, the Ghana policy on diaspora. So what do you think? I think you have read the manuscript of the policy. What do you think are some of the strategies for in the education sector, in agriculture and health? What do you think are the specific strategies for the government? And Mr. Jonas, well, what are the problems the diaspora investors face with local investors? Because I think in Nigeria, they face some challenges like envy and jealousy. And Rakesh, my own is also a reflection. I think both of them can serve the formal and informal remittances. They can, all the migrants can never be captured in financial inclusion. That's what I think. Thank you.
Thank you. I see, Benedict, you have a question in the chat. Benedict, do you want to say your question out loud? I'm also happy to read it. And we also had a couple of other questions I think that Ngozi had posed to our panelists. So as we wait for hands to come up, and I saw Jonas has already started responding to those. So that's great. Thanks again, Jonas. You can reemphasize those if you have time. Ngozi had a question. Benedict, thanks for sharing your question. We see you've got a microphone issue and we're happy to read it. But Nadine, there's a question to you from Ngozi. I think there on the specific strategies used by Ghana to harness diaspora resources for health, education and agriculture sector. So he already kind of spelled out that one. And then I think there was a question that came from Dr. Raj that was also asking, kind of unpacking this diaspora, the conceptual side of things. So it would be good if some of the panelists could also tackle this as you are bringing in your other arguments. She asks, what about knowing your diaspora and migrants in terms of who they are, where they are, the different characteristics and potential, as well as the inclusion strategy by national governments? What about the attitude of the established diaspora and their willingness to be engaged? It would be great to hear from you. I think, Anna, you touched on some of these things in relation to integration and what that means in terms of remittances. So it would be good. Dean, the floor is yours. Go ahead. Dean, go ahead. Okay, we also had a question that Jonas, questions that coming up, what should be the points we should follow for bringing policies and practices together? Very pragmatic question there, and I see you are engaging. There's a question from Benedict about the international body that govern remittances. Is the body integrated with global transfer channels such as Bitcoin? I was waiting for that to creep in. Crypto in terms of regulation, as well as the global money transfer systems. These are some of the questions that we have. Dean, if you can just, your hand is raised. If you can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. I will give it a second. Okay, maybe let's start with Anna. Anna, do you want to tackle the question that we gave to you, or a combination?
Yeah.
I know it's a bit overwhelming, but oh, Dean is here with us. Dean, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick one actually. I had wanted to know when preparation of the diaspora strategy, either for private sector, diaspora organization, or government, what are the key components on the African component country if one is preparing a diaspora strategy? What are the key areas that we need to focus on preparing, or from the side of government, for example? Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. We can ask. I think that either Nadine or Anna can take this one up. But we also know that there are a couple of strategies, I think, that have come out recently on diaspora engagement models as well. And Dean will share these a bit later with you. But we have panelists here who can elaborate a bit more. Anna, shall we start with you in terms of kind of giving us some responses and a wrap up from you?
Really congratulate with the audience for being so active and really responding to the stimulus that we gave. I think we could talk for hours and hours about all the issues raised. And I think something that is clear is that talking of remittances and diaspora engagement and investments is very complex. And because it's very complex, there is no one solution that either solves just one specific problem or all problems, or fits with all the different countries that face these problems. So something related to the informal flows and the possibility that they offer for migrants with an illegal status abroad, and also for families that they don't have any other access in where they live. It is true that the problem is not related only to moving from informal to formal channels, but also to the legal status that migrants have abroad. So that is about the regulations in the countries where they live about being illegal or irregular, undocumented or documented. So this is all like linked one aspect to the other. And I agree with many comments, and I think, for instance, on the state interest above migrants sometimes being a sort of strategy that each actor has its own interest. So the state towards migrants has an interest in terms of GDP or taxation or resources, etc. And migrants, they have another interest, that is development, solidarity, or like their own self-business. And as far as I could see, building the relationship between the diaspora, and then the question is, who is the diaspora, and who could talk for the diaspora in terms of representativeness. So, but between the diaspora and the government of the origin country, it should be a negotiated relationship. So there is not just one way that the government open the doors and say, okay, we decided this and that and whatever. So it's very difficult to negotiate with governments and then make clear about positions, because even in the diaspora, there is no homogeneous statement on different aspects. So for instance, how to manage money, where is development, what are the contents for this. And I just give you an example, just to add something more on the work that together with IOM South Sudan and the government of South Sudan, we made for the study on the policy on diaspora engagement and remittances. And we studied a corridor that was between South Sudan and Australia. And in Australia, we launched a survey to collect ideas and information on the diaspora there. And it was a failure, because the diaspora didn't trust anything that could come out of the government. And that was a real interesting and important research result, although it was a failure in terms of survey, but it could tell us that before starting the policy on how to engage diaspora, you should work on trust relationship. And this takes ages to build trust. That means knowing people, building up relationship, little by little creating something. And some countries are really far away from that point. Some others are really more advanced. So I think it's very interesting also this sharing of practices, but don't consider them always good practices because they work in a context and sometimes really they're not applicable in other contexts because migration issues, I mean, I'm thinking to female migration issues in some areas that bring power relationship in the context of origins within families and et cetera, et cetera. So I think we should start by putting on the table all the issues and then make order probably on this. And then maybe one day we could come up with some good ideas on how to face them. I'm stopping here.
Thank you, Anna. Jonas.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good questions being raised here, specifically around, you know, how do we drive more policy? How do we collaborate? Grace also mentioned, you know, numbers from the Philippines and how they structure things. I think government obviously plays a huge role here, but I think they're more of a problem than the solution because not to be mean, but my God, they're slow. And also the fact that they don't understand the opportunity window, even though so many countries are utilizing the diaspora as change makers. I don't understand it. I literally don't. Sometimes I wish that you could privatize the whole diaspora affairs just to show how it could be done. But unfortunately, you can't. A big problem is that, you know, the diaspora affairs is usually anchored through the foreign ministry and that department. And then you have another one for the Ministry of Labor that work with migrant workers and so on. And then you have the central bank and regulators. So within a country, policy-wise, it's split within 3 different departments instead of it being one. So you know, as you organize how to utilize these opportunities, you're already starting, you know, trying to get up a slope because how do you organize? How do you align? And why do you need to explain so much all the time? It's literally like speaking to a wall sometimes. I find it extremely frustrating. I also wish that the African Union could play a bigger role here in terms of anchoring collaboration, synergies, showcasing role models, showcasing results, because even between different African countries, you don't have collaboration on diaspora matters. So, you know, Kenya and Ethiopia don't discuss how do you activate the diaspora in your country? What role do you have? Like, it just feels like it's more theater than actually trying to unlock opportunities. I'm not kidding. I don't want to sound like depressed or whatnot. I personally think private sector is the way to go because at least we dare to try, we dare to challenge, we learn from other systems. And we implement. I also feel development agencies are way too slow here. So I also want to give them a little bit of a nudge. Because for me, operating on the African continent for 70 years, working with creating impact and solving SDGs and all of that, where is the diaspora in that plan? Where is the plans on like, how do we create a nurturing environment for the diaspora? I mean, it's not there. Like, it's like they have forgotten that the diaspora exists, even though it's the largest funding source. There's a lot of organizations here that are literally playing theater. We are not. And we're trying our best to be a disruptive force. We also trying to be as honest as we can, because we think the only way forward is by being honest instead of being another political player, speaking diplomatically and sugarcoating everything. But I don't have time for that. And I don't want to sugarcoat. The wheel has been invented. It's a talk about localizing it. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can learn from many countries working systems. There's plenty of data, but we don't innovate. We don't create solutions. It's literally just talky. It reminds me of a similar area. We work with the blue economy sector on the African continent. And it's also been like topic reserved for politicians and events. It's a talking subject. Actually developing coastal communities for real, you barely find any initiatives. So what do? We create initiatives. On the ground, we invest, and we show that it can be done. I look at the same way with remittances. Like, what are we talking about? It's billions of dollars. Come on. So I don't understand it, honestly. I wish I could take over the strategy for a country for a year, just to showcase how it could be done, and how you can utilize the diaspora as a nation builder if you are truly resource smart. But we are not resource smart. We're closer to being resource blind. And that's why things are not happening. Sorry, but I had to say it. We are not resource smart. If we were, we would not have these discussions. It's not a resource smart problem solving approach. Sorry. Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. No, Jonas, thank you. And please do not apologize, because that's exactly what we want these discussions to be. And often it happens to us that when we're at the tail end, we have this kind of Pandora box, which we reserve for the very end, opening up. But I think it's still very important that you've raised a lot of the issues. I see Dr. Iman in the chat also just, picking up things like corruption, human rights violations, embezzlement of development funds. Like, as you are unpacking that, you've given motivation, I think, to others. Sorry about that. I'm trying to locate that. Sorry. We've got that being unpacked in front of us. So there's a lot of issues. I think I see that former ambassador to the UAE is also here with us. Ambassador Grace, thank you for being here with us. I see you have your hand up, so I will just have to give you a minute to share on this subject, because I'm sure something has triggered your hand up there. So please go ahead and share with us. Ms. Grace.
No, of course, UAE and the Vatican. So anyway, we're trying to make sense of these burning issues. So we'll see what our new department will do. We do have a bank. And yes, the private sector is important. And now we will have elections. We're trying to mobilize not just the money remittances, but the political and social remittances of our migrants, knowing what is good governance and translating that. And they said so. For every dollar that we sent, we should get 5 more votes, so that we have a government that understands the diaspora and the migrant workers. As Dr. Bedud said, we have to differentiate between the two. But in our case, we're number 4, the US, the Filipino Americans, and everyone. So it's a very moving target, but I'm glad we're discussing this and we're getting ideas. So thank you all, and we hope to model something from the Philippines again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Jonas was onto a new model that we haven't heard about. Privatize the diaspora affairs. I hope there is somebody sitting somewhere in a government institution, and maybe their ears have been a bit pinked to think about some of the ideas, but they always say we have to think outside the box, and in order for us to see the change that we have not seen before. So thank you, Jonas, and also Ms. Grace, for sharing those reflections, and thank you to all the reflections that are coming into the chat as well. Nadine, did you want to give us your reflections on some of the issues that are being discussed?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I would like to start by replying to Mr. Ngozi's question on the very specifics of the specific strategies used by Ghana to harness diaspora resources. And I'm very happy that you raised these aspects of education, health, and agriculture, because I think we would all, to a large extent, agree that these are very important sectors where also diaspora engagement can be used. Unfortunately, for what I have seen and read so far, it's those investment opportunities when it comes to what is proposed in the policy and the discussions around that for Ghana. It's largely on other sectors. It's on energy, it's on infrastructures, it's on tourism, it's on manufacturing, and we are missing especially these aspects that you have raised in here. And I think now we can all draw our conclusions from that and what implications this also has. I think this is very important to consider, and then also think about the focus that is largely on the financial side of remittances in the first place, whereas I then would argue that especially it's in the education and the health sector, also we need a lot of the so-called social remittances, the knowledge and the skills transfer. Of course, we also need the finances, but here, as I would say, especially also such social remittances are key. And the other point I wanted to touch upon is this, the aspect of the trust relationship that you have raised, Anna, because here I see, a good relation to this year of return that the Ghanaian government has proposed in 2019 to invite people from the diaspora to come to the country. And I think this is in the first place not migrants, but rather second or third generation people from living abroad and coming back and inviting them back to the country and starting slowly to building these connections and like starting this interest, also starting a conversation about what it could look like to engage further or to cooperate further. And I think this, it could be a starting point, definitely to get the conversation going. But eventually I would like to stress what you said, Peggy, and the agency migrants have, that we should not undermine in this process or in all these discussions, and that are very key. So thank you very much.
Nadine, thank you so much in pointing into these important structural spaces as well, as important things to take into consideration as we move to talk about the important role of remittances. Anna?
Yes. Let me just also go to Jonas, and that I consider a warrior from the diaspora. So really fighting, because there was a study from an initiative from MF, making finance work for Africa, sorry. So it's a multilateral initiative, and there was an interesting study that went through the different initiatives that in different countries were trying to support diaspora investments. So they could be mixed with the development agencies, governments, etc. And considering also the cost of these initiatives compared to, let's say, the benefits that these initiatives were bringing. And most of them, I say a very, very small part of them, were really successful in being able to capture the interest of the diaspora to reach, because many people from the diaspora already invest and do business in their country of origin. The problem is that all development agencies are not able to interact with these people. And I guess there are two different channels that they work on and they live on, because many of these other initiatives are trying probably to involve people that are not willing to really invest or do business or be an entrepreneur. It's not that everybody has to be an entrepreneur, but you can be able to use your money in a proficient way and safely and whatever. And what I see is that, of course, you don't need 100 entrepreneurs. You just need a couple who are doing then a great job there. So anything related also to the initiative of Pangaea, I think is great because it offers an opportunity for people to know that if they just send remittances, there is a whole world of things that they could do in order to invest, but they really also need to be ready to invest there, because using investment tools, a bond or whatever, it means that you have to be aware of what you're doing. And it's not just because a bond exists that any people from the diaspora should go and buy one. So you should really be able to manage your money, your remittances, your saving for the country of origin, for your benefit as well. And in this way, I think That's why financial inclusion, financial literacy should be important to take the right decisions for everybody. So not to take a longer step and then finding yourself in a critical situation.
Thank you, Anna, for adding in that. Rakesh, do you want to share with us and wrap us up?
Things are quite like large canvas to complete, and this is very difficult. I'll repeat my statement, and this is very important since we are thinking about something and we cannot consider this entire discussion with objective attitude. Basically, things are difficult and we have to consider the importance of diaspora and migrants. So very important, let's recognize our diaspora. We don't recognize our diaspora, we just consider them numbers, opportunity, money, and often we think, look, they have money and we can get that money with the diaspora bonds or other events. So let's recognize them. Let's start create platforms for dialogue. And this dialogue, and again, this is not just for to government, to everyone, to all, for us also as a civil society members. We need to have these programs and events to meet diaspora so that a real picture should be shared with each other. So how diasporas can engage and how civil society can help them to have better engagement. So that thing need to be done. Thank you.
Rakesh, thank you for sharing those reflections. I see there's much more, a lot of people kind of chipping in and bringing in various aspects of it. We've also tried to share different links for the different speakers who are here with us, whether we're sharing LinkedIn or we're also sharing some organization links as well. And just to Anna and to Nadine, just check the chat that we've sent through also the right links for some of the research. I think you would find a vast wide of the research that our panelists here have shared with us. I would also be sharing, I think the students, somebody asked me, where we're going to find Rakesh's text. It's coming. Just give me 2 seconds. I'm going to share it through. But I thought that I take the opportunity to just thank all our panelists for being here with us today. I think we've touched on issues that we have been, for those who have been with us from the very beginning, have been dying to talk about when we talk about diaspora engagement. And it's really been interesting to kind of bring in the centerpiece on remittances. And, starting from, Rakesh, who really, brings us back to the question of saying, know who we're talking about, beyond us celebrating people because we want to derive something out of people. Let's sort of look at the centrality, I think, around trust as well. Anna has really brought this out as well. How do we also invest into diaspora and how do we look at diaspora and migrant agency when we talk about investment that's coming from people that are making their livelihoods outside and sending remittances home, and also, other speakers, Nadine and the others, Jonas, we've also talked about the space where we look at transnational practice. Are we really learning from each other? And then also, I like that Rakesh unpacked to say, let's not just pick everything that we want from each other. Let's not replicate, but let's also question. Let's also look at things openly. Thanks again for all the panelists that came in to talk about this. Can we look at what works? And from the private sector angle as well, really talking about we talk, we learn, and we take action. Let's not spend too much time in the talking room as government would do. I think the role of red tape or the slowdown of red tape, I think has been much talked about here, whether in terms of structures, of looking at migrant agency, of also not really understanding the needs of the migrants, but being very ready to derive from migrants. That kind of remains center stage. I think we've been challenged by Jonas, and I really do hope that this spreads its wings to say, can we loan out that diaspora unit for a year? Let me run diaspora affairs for a year from beginning to the end in the hands of private sector to see how we can have a much more action-oriented policies coming out of it, but where the practice essentially would meet the policy. So it's a big challenge. We wonder which government diaspora unit would be willing to take that up, but you never know. They may also be, a subnational government out there that has been thinking around these initiatives. So please do let us know, and we will connect you straight to Jonas, who's good at building models and structures, and that could unpack that. But we've also heard, I think, a lot about how development agencies need to pick up the pace, right? They need to really join to move away from the theater, as others have talked about it. Jonas talked a lot about this theater aspect where we all come and make a very big show, but really put the hand, where we talk. We've seen how developed countries themselves have gone to the stages that they have reached because of the role of diaspora. So how about kind of really lending that hand and opening the space and giving the chairs to diaspora to take part in nation building, and also to kind of push for that enabling environment, really allowing private sector to be able to plug and play, to go beyond the talk show. Data is really central, and I think we've also touched on many other issues that have to do into the space of remittances. We cannot manage to unpack it in 2 hours, which we have really taken too much time. I want to say thank you again to Jonas, to Nadine, to Anna, and to Rakesh for being here with us today. We thank you again to our participants who are always actively engaging with us. Even beyond this, I usually am receiving like messages or in the chat, somebody still wants to take the conversation another step further. Please do feel free. We want to engage with you. We invite you to join us on Thursday, where we look at GCM objective number 21. And we're talking about a subject that still touches on diaspora engagement, that still touches a lot also on migrants. And this time, the very unpopular subject around dignified returns and reintegration and what that looks like. So we hope that the same kind of spirit can be with us through as we have our panelists that has joined us all the way from research institutions are joining us. We also have IOM joining us in this, and we've got others that are coming from Sri Lanka that are going to talk to us about what reintegration programs look like, but also, how that whole of society, whole of government approach can help us in this objective that various countries have put themselves up to. For today, we say thank you, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And to Asia Pacific, good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Paddy, and all panelists.
Anna,
Looking forward to
thank
the
you.
next.
Thank you, Nadine.